Good afternoon. The meeting will now come to order. My name is Josh Abrams, and I have the distinct pleasure of serving as the president of the Association for Theatre and Higher Education. Welcome to ATHE's 2021 annual membership meeting. When we initially planned this conference, we were supposed to gather in Austin on unceded land of the Alabama Coushatta, Caddo, Carrizo Comecrudo, Coahuiltecan, Comanche, Kickapoo, Lipan Apache, Tonkawa, and Isleta del Sur Pueblo. We acknowledge them and all the American Indian and Indigenous peoples and communities who have been or have become a part of these lands and territories in Texas. While most of us are no longer physically on site, I ask that you all please join me in acknowledging these communities. In shifting to a virtual convening, I ask that we each take a moment privately to acknowledge the traditional inhabitants of the land on which each of us sit. Feel free to paste them in the chat. Our online presence raises further issues that I feel crucial we also take a moment to recognize. The World Wide Web is a colonizing technology that both draws upon and furthers traditions of injustice. The equipment and systems that allow us to gather today remain inaccessible in many Indigenous communities, as well as presenting differential barriers to access, in which we remain complicit in legacies and practices of white supremacy. Please join me in a moment of silence for these communities and individuals unable to be here with us today and throughout this conference. We do not have a quorum today. Let the record show that the meeting was called to order at 1:34 p.m. Austin time. As we gather to celebrate the achievements of ATHE and its members, we must first take a moment to acknowledge those friends and colleagues whom we have lost since our last meeting. This year, we mourn the passing of the following educator artists. Miguel Algarin, Mary Catherine Bateson, Roger Bechtel, Eric Bentley. Lauren Berlant, Lee Brewer, Charles Butler, Samuel Clausen. Robert Colby, Christina Crosby, Jacques d'Amboise, Peter Doherty. Ludwig Flossen, Anna Halprin, David Holman, Florence Howe. Sally Jacobs, Amy Kaplan, Arthur Coppett, Ming Cho Lee. Jerzy Limon, Robbie McCauley, Christopher McCullough, Kevin Moore. Wayne Robinson, Miriam Jimenez Roman, Elka Schumann, Catherine Silverstone. Capilia Vatetian, Douglas Turner Ward, Noel Witz, David Young. If there are any other recently departed members of our profession whom you would like to acknowledge, I encourage you to please place their names in the chat. Please join me in a moment of silence for those whom we have lost. Sarah Bryant Bertai, Dr. Robert Everding. ATHE Secretary Megan Gagner has provided the minutes of the previous membership meeting, which have been made available via the ATHE website. The chair will now entertain a motion to approve these minutes. Moved by Kristen Essen. Do I have a second? Seconded by Henry Weil. Thank you. Motion to approve the minutes posted as a poll in the chat. Posted as a poll. The motion carries. Unopposed, 69 votes yes. At this time, the chair would like to recognize Treasurer John Rossini for an update on the financial health of the organization.
Good afternoon. My name is John Rossini. I am ending my third year of service as treasurer of ATHE, and I have one more to go. I am zooming to you from the unceded lands of the Nisenan peoples outside of Sacramento, California. The preliminary unaudited statement of financial activities for the 2020-2021 fiscal year, which runs from June 1st to May 31, shows ordinary income from operations of $304,259, ordinary expenses for operations of $228,143, resulting in a positive revenue for the year of $76,116, our first non-deficit year in 5 years. Because of the virtual nature of last year's conference, both income and expenses numbers were significantly lower than usual. On May 31st, 2021, we had approximately $146,958 in available cash, but the majority of this is membership renewal and conference registration fees for the current conference, which are ATHE's only significant sources of revenue for the year. So this is typically a high point of fiscal solvency. Our association reserve fund has followed the rise in the stock market, and as of May 31, 2021, stood at $754,589. Because of this growth, I proposed a spending plan which authorizes 3 to 5% of the fund to be used yearly in the service of ATHE's mission, provided we maintain a minimum balance of 100% of one typical year's operational expenses, which is currently around $600,000. This spending plan was approved at the Governing Council meeting on Wednesday, and the initial use of funds will support hiring DEI consultants and some small grants to focus groups for activities supporting anti-racism. As long as the reserve remains robust, we hope to continue to be able to draw funds to support organizational priorities. That said, the plan returned to in-person conferences in 2022 and 2023, which were contracted, will require some real fiscal consideration. Operational deficits over the last several years were generated because our revenues did not match our overall conference costs, which is not a reflection of the care and fiscal responsibility of the vice presidents of conferences, but of lower than projected registration and sponsorship revenues. In addition, the accessibility benefits of virtual and hybrid conferences raise the desirability of providing some of these elements during our ATHE in-person conferences, which will generate additional operational and audiovisual costs. At the same time, we are all very aware that an in-person ATHE conference is a very expensive conference for many of our members. While we have implemented some meaningful cost-saving measures, thanks primarily to the efforts of our executive director, Amy Zygmuntski, it is crucial that we continue to carefully communicate about the real costs of our endeavors so that we can work together to invest in our priorities. The size and complexity of our conference limits our choice of venues and carries its own set of fixed costs. So it is worth seriously considering what activities hold value in an in-person setting and shift programming to center those activities during our shared time together in person. I hope to hold a meeting with focus group representatives in the next few months to demystify conference costs and discuss ways we can work collectively to maintain conference accessibility and value. In the meantime, if you have any questions, concerns, or ideas, or if you are interested in serving on the Finance Committee, please email me at treasurer@athe.org. Thank you.
Thank you, John. The chair will now entertain a motion to accept the treasurer's report. Thank you. Moved by Cleo House. Do I have a second? Thank you, Lionel Walsh, second. Call the question. Motion to approve the treasurer's report as delivered by John Rossini. Motion carries. Again, while noting we're not quorate. 79 votes in favor, 4 abstentions. At this time, the chair would like to recognize Vice President for Conference-elect, Jen Scott Mobley, to give us a brief preview of next year's conference. Jen Scott.
Hello, I'm Jen Scott Mobley, the VP of Conference for 2022. And I'd like to begin by letting you know I'm Zooming from Greenville, North Carolina, and I honor and acknowledge the Tuscarora people, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work. And next, I would like to say a hearty congratulations to Ann Haugo and the 2021 Planning Committee for this inspiring conference that we're having right now. Yet again, our committee was compelled to pivot well into the planning process and pull off the impossible, but the results have been extraordinary. So I thank you all for your labor. And I'm excited and humbled to be a part of the 2022 Conference Committee. And I'd like to thank each and every member of the committee who have all contributed to crafting this theme in what was truly a collaborative process. We're excited to return, so to speak, to Detroit in what we trust will be our face-to-face conference after 2 years of remote engagement. And with our theme, rehearsing the possible, practicing reparative creativity, we ask how our live embodied presence in Detroit can offer emergent strategies that shape sustainable change in our field, our host city, and our communities. Considering the questions that Detroit urges us to ask, we build mindfully on this year's theme to ensure that, as one of our anti-racist forums from yesterday queried, this is a movement, not a moment for ATHE. I will let you all read the theme call for yourself, and I welcome you to reach out to me or any member of my terrific committee with suggestions or aspirations for Detroit 2022, as we seek to rehearse for the possible and practice for a better future, better present and future we want to embody, or as Tina Camp frames the futurity, live the future now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen Scott. It has been my privilege as president of this august organization to deliver a report on the state of the association at the annual membership meeting. In a year of presidential handover, my brief remarks here will open up to longer remarks from President-elect Chase Bringardner, who will deliver his first address as president in just a matter of minutes, outlining his vision for the organization and spotlighting the urgency of associations like ours. Two years ago, I stood on a stage in Orlando next to immediate past President Harvey Young and spoke to you all about my plans for the next 2 years. I spoke about ATHE as an advocacy organization and asked, quote, what might it mean as an academic organization dedicated to theater to make a claim to advocacy in an age of crisis management in our present global state of emergency, unquote. Little did I know then what the next 2 years would bring. The crises and global emergencies of which I spoke then not only continued but deepened and were joined by new and wholly unexpected events. The landscape of higher education, remains dire, with continual program closures, retrenchments, and ongoing threats. The impacts of the pandemic are only beginning. And will continue to affect budgets and planning across the sector for years to come. In the aftermath of the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others, the rightful calling out of us as an organization grounded in supremacy has only just begun to lead to change. A year ago, I said we were dedicating ourselves to that change. And in this past month, after a nationwide search by the Governing Council, a task force drawn from across the membership launched a DEIJ consultation process, facilitated by Samira Abdul Karim of the consultancy Huntington Spaces. Samira will also be conducting a cultural audit and holding listening sessions to hear from all of you. I hope you will all take the time to contribute. This process is aimed at embedding transformative change and racial justice within ATHE and making us into the anti-racist organization we want and need to be if we have any hope to survive and continue to advocate for the importance of theater, both in higher education and in the world. These past 2 years have set new challenges and expectations for us, and I'm delighted to hand the gavel on to my incredible successor, Chase Bringardner. In looking back over my term, I'm pleased that we have succeeded, though perhaps somewhat accidentally, not exactly as I intended, in my commitment for ATHE to become a more global organization. The shift over the past 2 years to online conferences has greatly increased our reach, but that access has also come at a price, as the inability to gather in the same room unquestionably impacts on each of us and on our profession. The return to in-person conferences, which so many of us so fervently desire, will produce new challenges, and our current funding models will not support hybrid conferences without significant change. ASTR President Marla Carlson spoke about this very clearly and eloquently in a letter to ASTR membership on the 30th of June this year. And I encourage you, those of you who have not read it, to visit their website and take a few moments to read it. The conference model will need to change, and we need to be at the forefront of that. Working closely with related organizations was another of my key goals, and in 2019, I brought together a group of presidents of associations dedicated to theater and allied disciplines globally. That group has continued to meet regularly, and we have an active private Basecamp site that's facilitated more sharing of best practice and open lines of communications across organizations, enabling the beginnings of joint lobbying efforts aimed at tackling the challenges to our field and to theater across the globe. We've launched a resource for this through the ATHE website, which I hope and believe will continue to expand, and I look forward to the possibilities that such communication between associations will allow. I'd like to thank the members of the Governing Council over the past 2 years who have contributed tirelessly in the face of the challenges that have faced us all, dedicating countless volunteer hours to considerations of what is best for ATHE, for our members, in the constantly shifting sands of the present. I could single out so many of their initiatives, but will point here to only 2 from outgoing GC members. Vice President for Professional Development, Noe Montes, led a global task force who thoroughly revamped the tenure and promotion guidelines, bringing them up to date into the 21st century with a range of significant changes, including a focus on DEIJ work, new consideration of digital outputs, and detailed sections and guidance to explicitly serve a range of additional career trajectories, such as intimacy directors. The full document should be up on the website shortly. More internal change, and yet every much as important, was spearheaded by Member-at-Large Carla Delegata, who led a wholesale editing of our operations manual, which I hope to be picking up over the next month with a few volunteers, including Carla again from the Governing Council, to bring back to the GC for adoption. Thank you once again to all the members of the Governing Council for your commitment, your engagement, thoughtful consideration, and your debate over these past 2 years. Thank you especially as well to Vice Presidents for Conference, Carlos Alexis Cruz and Anne Haugo, their conference committees, and indeed members of all of our committees, as well as focus group leadership, all of whom have thrown themselves into the challenges we have faced. And I believe that ATHE has only begun to test the waters of its potential. I've been fortunate to do all of this alongside our new executive director, Amy Zygmonski, who's proven time and time again to be a true asset to the organization. And I look forward to her continued tenure, her contribution of her fiscal expertise, thoughtfulness, care, and love for this organization and this field as she and the new governing council, under Chase's more than capable leadership, navigate the shoals ahead. And my final thank you to all of you, all the ATHE members, for the privilege of serving as your president. It has truly been one of the most profound honors of my career. Thank you. As I say, one of the most rewarding elements of serving you all as president has been the chance to work with so many generous volunteers up and down the breadth of the organization. I would like to especially acknowledge and name the members of the 2021 conference committee who have worked tirelessly to plan and execute this excellent conference, and the contingency planning that they've done along the way as we considered, weighed, went back and forth as to whether we would like to be in person, hybrid, or virtual. As of last night, we had 1,050 total registrations. Congratulations. Anne Haugo, VP for Conference 2021, Illinois State University. Roxanne Schroeder-Arce, University of Texas, Austin. Jane Barnett, University of Kansas. Cassidy Browning, University of Texas at Austin. Veranda Carey, Oakton Community College. Teresa Robbins Dudek, Independent Scholar. Lamil Island, University of Pittsburgh. David Jortner, Baylor University. Alireza Mirzaji, DePaul University. Courtney Elkin Moeller, Butler University. Mitchell Ost, the College Preparatory School. And Travis Stern, Bradley University. Thank you to the conference committee members. I will now call the names of the continuing members of the Governing Council. While we can't see you, if we were in the same space, I would normally ask you to please stand or raise your hands as I call your name. We'll share their names here. President-elect, soon to be President, Chase Bringardner. Secretary, Megan Geigner. Treasurer, John Rossini. Vice President for Membership and Marketing, Jane Barnett. Vice President for Research and Publication, Kristen Essen. Vice President for Conference 2022, Jen Scott Mobley. Member at Large for Finance, Suzanne Dell. We thank you all for your continued service to this association. The following people have served the association as officers for the past 2 years and are now completing their terms of office as determined by our bylaws. On behalf of the ATHE membership, I thank you each for your service. Vice President for Advocacy, Monica White and Dunu. Vice President for Awards, Dacia Posner. Vice President for Conference 2021, Anne Haugo. Vice President for Professional Development, Noe Montez. Member at Large for Operations, Carla Delegata. Member at Large for Outreach, Emily Rowley. Member at Large for Focus Groups, Lionel Walsh. Please join me in your own spaces in one more round of applause for our outgoing Governing Council members. At this time, I invite ATHE's President-elect, Chase Bringardner, to join me in the webinar. Chase Springgardner, you've been elected by the ATHE membership to serve a 2-year term as president of the association, commencing today and continuing through the annual meeting of 2023. As per Article 8, Section 6 of the ATHE bylaws, the president shall determine agendas for, call, and preside over all meetings of ATHE and the governing council, appoint persons to such offices and positions as are required by the bylaws, represent ATHE in dealing with other organizations, serve as signatory on all contracts, and generally exercise leadership that will strengthen and expand the association. Will you accept these responsibilities as well as other presidential duties such as may arise in response to the needs of the association?
I will.
Having reaffirmed your willingness to serve, I hereby transfer to you the office of President for the Association for Theatre and Higher Education, with all the rights, privileges, obligations, and responsibilities pertaining thereto. The gavel's in the mail. I'd also like to recognize the incoming members of the Governing Council, serving their terms from today through August of 2023. President-elect Carlos Alexis Cruz, Vice President for Advocacy, Khalid Long, Vice President for Awards, Hillary Miller, Vice President for Conference 2021, 2023, Danny Snyder-Young, Vice President for Professional Development, Angeli Hutchinson, Member at Large for Operations, Veranda Carey, Member at Large for Outreach, Anita Gonzalez, Member at Large for Focus Groups, Eunice Ferreira. Colleagues, you have been elected to serve ATHE and its membership. It will be your duty to serve on the board to advance our mission, visions, and goals, and to represent the members and constituents. Please join me in a round of applause to welcome our new officers. Thank you. Chase, over to you.
Thank you, Josh. I join you all today from Auburn, Alabama, at Auburn University, built on the unceded indigenous homelands and resources of the Muskogee Creek people, the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. I would like to start my remarks today with some expressions of gratitude. Thank you to all the outgoing members of the Governing Council, as well as all those focus group representatives, conference planners, members at large, graduate student representatives, and others who so graciously volunteered their time and their energies in service to their focus groups, ATHE, and the larger fields of theater and performance. Your willingness to serve in these particularly challenging times speaks not only to your graciousness of spirit, but also to your commitment to the various fields we traverse. I also want to thank our executive director, Amy Zygmonski, for all her labor. She, along with Devin Binder and Sean Franklin Sewell, worked diligently over the past year to transition a second conference in a row to a fully digital platform. I am grateful for Amy's passion and commitment to the organization and her care and integrity in helping to realize its work. I also want to thank Vice President of Conference for 2021, Ann Hago, and her entire committee. This conference has been a stirring success with 298 individual sessions on the virtual schedule, the most ever for an ATHE conference of any kind. The breadth and depth of programming speaks to the attention and thoughtfulness Anne and her committee, as well as the focus group representatives and conference planners put into the entire proceedings. Their conscientious curation is evidenced in the vibrant, engaged discussions and roundtables, perceptive paper presentations, panels, workshops, demonstrations, and readings, the active, vital plenaries, the thoughtful and energizing keynote, and the urgent, challenging performances. Finally, I want to thank outgoing President Josh Abrams. His steady leadership through the seemingly constant pivots allowed ATHE to persevere as other organizations struggled with financial solvency. His thoughtfulness, his attention to detail, and his global perspective enriched the organization and will continue to influence ATHE for years to come. So again, thank you to everyone for your many efforts. And for those new and continuing leaders, I look forward to collaborating with you. As an organization that operates almost entirely on volunteer labor, we must never take that labor for granted and must always work to create and sustain practices that honor those efforts. When I found out that I had the privilege of serving ATHE as president, I did not imagine that I would make my first real remarks from a chair at a table in my home office. I believed I would be addressing you all from a hotel ballroom in Austin, Texas, the very city where, as a very green graduate student at UT Austin, fresh out of undergraduate, I first heard about ATHE. I had the extreme privilege of arriving at UT the same year Jill Dolan arrived and established the Performance as Public Practice program. I found my way to UT Austin at the insistence of my undergraduate mentor and former ATHE Vice President of Advocacy, Anne-Marie Costa. I vividly remember Jill, a former president of ATHE, speaking of the importance of attending, sharing research, and engaging in the important work done by the organization. Excited and eager to participate, and inspired by legacies of ATHE leadership I found in my mentors, I pored over the call for papers for the 2001 ATHE conference in San Diego and found a perfect panel seeking participants. I submitted my abstract and promptly didn't get in. And yet, in that moment, Jill realized the importance of attending, of being in the room, and found a way to piece together some leftover funding, granting me the access that allowed me to attend. From that moment, and with that initial access, I have served in a variety of positions and have come to appreciate the possibilities inherent in ATHE. Few, if any of us, could have imagined all that has occurred over the past almost 2 years now as a result of these global pandemics. I want to acknowledge the huge losses that have occurred in these times. I also acknowledge that all times in their way are terrible, and some people always live in precarious times, and this time has only just intensified existing oppressions people face. These losses manifest differently for all of us and deeply inform our continued relationship to theater and performance, as well as higher education. In times of such great precarity, where instability and uncertainty persist, ATHE can and must create space for its members to interrogate theater and higher education and emerge from this rupture engaged in the processes of creating and crafting new structures and systems to enact sustainable change. In my short time as president, I want to focus on two key words: access and advocacy. Access. ATHE is not yet an anti-racist organization, but it must be and must do the work to move clearly, urgently, and decisively towards that goal, with the knowledge that the goal of being an anti-racist organization is not one that an organization reaches at one moment in time, but instead is a goal defined by work that is always unfinished and begins anew each day. ATHE must disrupt the comfort of our various positions of privilege, listen and act to open up access and create and share space. ATHE must work to become proactive and timely, not reactive and regressive. ATHE has to ask the hard questions. ATHE cannot just look at whether systems and structures work or don't work, but who they work for. ATHE has to do the work to interrogate its systems and then be willing to dismantle those systems to open up access and not retrench and close off. ATHE must center the experience of members of the global majority, full stop. ATHE must also allow itself to stay in the discomfort that comes from naming and calling out white supremacy and privilege and actively pursue sustainable structural change. As Monica White-Ndunu phrased it in a session Wednesday on the Kraft Institute's Reparations, Healing, and Restorative Justice Initiative, ATHE has to acknowledge the harm these structures have caused and work to repair that harm. ATHE must work to create communities of consciousness and, as Tai Defoe offered in that wonderful keynote conversation, also create ecosystems of accountability that actively prioritize access. One of the primary ways many, if not most, members of ATHE access the organization is through the focus groups. In many ways, ATHE is unique in its structure, wherein these 23 individual focus groups represent a multitude of perspectives, affinities, and approaches, and serve as the vital engine that powers the organization. Members of focus groups become leaders within focus groups who then seek positions on the governing council. The governing council, like the board of a nonprofit, takes a more comprehensive view of the entirety of the collective ATHE, representing areas of interest pertinent to all the focus groups, such as membership and marketing, advocacy, and professional development, to name just a few. Many have spoken of ATHE as a grassroots organization, one wherein the collective action of individuals coming together can affect change, one where hierarchies are potentially disrupted. And yet, Others express frustration about ATHE's governing structures, the seeming remoteness of the governing council and operations committee that conduct business at a remove from the focus groups. For new and even more seasoned members, ATHE can sometimes appear overwhelming, a complicated matrix lacking transparency and clear articulated pathways of entry. By prioritizing member access, I plan to reinvest ATHE in the focus group structure and center their strength as 23 open doors into the association. In other words, for the next 2 years, ATHE is doubling down on its focus groups, embracing the symbiotic relationship between the governing council and focus groups to tackle the pressing issues facing the field in a truly comprehensive, active way. To this end, at next year's conference in Detroit, we will be holding a first of its kind focus group summit to work together collectively to think through the relationship between the individual focus groups to the larger collective ATHE. What is the relationship between a focus group's autonomy and their accountability to the overall ethos of the organization? How do the different structures or configurations of focus groups, incorporation status, etc., shape their relationship to the collective ATHE and to other focus groups? We will also be able to think about sustainability and the ways a collective ATHE can craft more accessible and sustainable practices of data transfer and communication that can assist in processes of transition and in transparency across the focus groups and organization. We will also think through and share best practices and create new structures to facilitate collaboration and communication between focus groups. We will grapple with how we create space and how we make sure to allocate resources to support the spaces that we create. This summit will also provide an opportunity to focus on the role of volunteer labor within the association. How can we best employ, direct, and sustain the volunteer labor of a volunteer organization? ATHE needs to consider how volunteer labor works to limit access and how we might address those concerns through the creation of new structures. We also need to identify what it will take to dismantle the structures that create those very limitations. Much like the incredibly important interventions occurring across the professional theater and performance landscapes, we must reconsider and revise our own labor practices within our own organization to create more sustainable, humane, and equitable practices that center access. In doing that important work, we must also actively acknowledge and reduce harm while distilling labor down to what is really necessary. The summit will also provide opportunities to consider how these practices in ATHE might translate to our own departments, stages, and other work environments. How can this engaged collective work within ATHE resonate beyond an annual conference? Advocacy. One of the primary frustrations I have felt as a member of ATHE, and that I have heard expressed by countless others, is the perception that change at ATHE happens at a glacial pace. To accomplish any major initiatives takes a series of steps that often make timely action nearly impossible. That, coupled with the limited terms of leadership roles in both focus groups and the governing council, makes ATHE a more reactive than proactive organization. Initiatives and exciting ideas burn bright initially, only to fade as people cycle off terms. Motions and action items get buried in processes and procedures. The reality within the 2-year span of the large majority of leadership positions in ATHE is that just when you feel like you understand what you're supposed to do, that you've cracked the code and can really engage in the work, you've reached the end of your term and you aren't able to implement the change you envisioned. ATHE must acknowledge the harm of these practices and take active steps to reduce that harm. We need to interrogate these practices and systems we have in place to determine whether they are serving the needs of the organization in a timely, sustainable manner. And if not, figure out what changes need to be implemented now. One real strength of ATHE is its size and scope and its ability and position to advocate. We are the Association for Theater in Higher Education. The name really says a great deal of who we are and what we are capable of. ATHE needs to refocus as a more proactive organization, both to meet the challenges of this particular moment, but also to anticipate and lead through future moments, and moreover, shift those moments into sustained movements. Great strides have been made to activate and expedite responses in some areas, as evidenced by changes to the ways ATHE advocates for programs and departments in positions of precarity, and through Patty Ibarra's work during her time as ATHE president to engage, research, and center contingent labor. I would like to see this activation happen across the whole organization in a more supported, resourced, and sustainable way. The Focus Group Summit provides an opportunity to engage in this work as well. If we articulate clearly a strong set of goals that includes input from every focus group and that carves out clear action for each group to take to meet those goals, perhaps there could be a kind of reset moment, a moment to activate the collective ATHE with the engine of its focus groups. In the coming month, the Governing Council and the focus group representatives and conference planners will meet to begin discussing this summit and to iron out the details. It should be an exciting moment to celebrate the incredible work of the focus groups and to work collaboratively and collectively to shape the future of ATHE. Next year's conference theme, as conceived by Jen Scott Mobley and her incredible committee, picks up on many of the themes that I've outlined here. Rehearsing the possible, practicing reparative creativity promises to create space to engage in these conversations and activate our efforts. As stated in their call, quote, building upon the work of the 2021 conference of Claim, Frame, Pair, Right, etc., 2022 invites ATHE to deepen engagements with questions that Detroit urges us to address. How will we abolish institutional embedded racist structures? As we seek to reimagine, rebuild, and rise up, what are some new arrangements of the possible that we might pursue? In World Making, Doreen Kondo asserts that reparative creativity offers possibilities to work through effects of effective and structural violence, reminding us that the reparative is a critical, political, and artistic practice. Engaging this line of thinking, we query, how will we engage our practices to harness the power of theater for social justice? End quote. In closing, I am hopeful about the future of ATHE. I am hopeful about the work we have to accomplish and our ability to do so collectively together. I am here to listen, to facilitate, to support, to conspire, and to create space with you. Please do not ever hesitate to reach out to me directly to engage in conversation or discussion. Over the next 2 years, as we revisit Detroit and Austin, we will bring with us all we have learned from these 2 years virtually engaging with those locations. I hope we will not only enjoy the opportunity to share physical space together once again, but I also hope we will use those opportunities to do the work together of determining where we want ATHE to go in the future and how we want ATHE to continue to shape the field of higher education. As a character from one of my favorite television shows, appropriately set in Austin, Texas, always says, clear eyes, full hearts, can't lose. Thank you. Okay, let me see here. At this point, I will entertain any new business. If you have new business, please put it into the Q&A. Seeing none currently, our business has concluded. The chair will now entertain a motion to adjourn. Do I have a motion to adjourn in the chat? So moved. Thank you, Michael Gross. Second. Thank you, Aaron Thomas. Second. So I'll call the question. And by a 100%, 100% of you are ready to adjourn. So we are going to adjourn. Thank you all so very much for joining virtually here today. I cannot wait to collaborate and work with all of you over the next couple of years. Enjoy the rest of your conferences. Take care.